The moving truck disappeared around the corner, taking the last of Marcus's belongings with it, and I stood in the doorway of my apartment, watching the taillights fade into the December twilight. The silence that followed wasn't the hollow echo of abandonment I'd expected. It was something else entirely. Something that felt suspiciously like relief. 3 months. 3 months since he'd looked me in the eye over morning coffee and said, "I think we need to talk, Claire. I've been thinking a lot lately, and I don't think this is working anymore." 3 months since he'd moved in with Amber, his 23-year-old colleague from the marketing firm where he worked as a junior account executive. 3 months since I'd discovered that the man I'd supported through business school, career changes, and countless existential crises had decided I was too set in my ways for someone only 31 years old. I closed the door and leaned against it, letting the weight of the moment settle into my bones. For the first time in 6 years, I was completely alone. And for the first time in 6 years, I felt like I could finally breathe. We met in college, Marcus and I. I was a senior at Northwestern, double majoring in business and communications, working 2 part-time jobs to cover my tuition and living expenses. He was a junior who transferred from a community college, charming and ambitious, but perpetually broke, always borrowing money for textbooks or rent. I thought his financial struggles were temporary, a product of his working-class background and the fact that he was putting himself through school. I admired his determination. I wanted to help. "You're going to be incredibly successful someday," I told him during one of our late-night study sessions in the library, watching him work through his economics homework with the same intensity he brought to everything else. "I can see it in you." He looked up from his textbook and smiled that crooked smile that made my stomach flutter. "You really think so?" "I know so. You just need someone who believes in you." I became that someone. When he couldn't afford his share of groceries, I covered it. When his laptop died 2 weeks before finals, I helped him buy a new one. When he graduated and struggled to find work in his field, I supported him while he figured things out. I told myself I was investing in our future together. After college, we moved to Chicago. I landed a marketing coordinator position at a mid-sized consulting firm right away. Marcus took a job at a coffee shop while he looked for something more aligned with his goals. The coffee shop job lasted 3 months. Then came the stint at a startup that folded within 6 weeks. Then the sales position he quit because the commission structure was exploitative. Then the long period of unemployment while he networked and explored opportunities. "I'm not just going to take any job, Claire," he said when I gently suggested he might want to consider some of the positions I'd found for him online. "I have standards. I want to build a career, not just collect a paycheck." I respected that. I respected his ambition, his refusal to settle. What I didn't realize was that while he was holding out for the perfect opportunity, I was working 60-hour weeks to cover our rent, groceries, utilities, and his student loan payments. I was building a career while subsidizing his extended adolescence. The pattern continued for years. Marcus would find a job, work it for a few months, then quit or get fired for various reasons. Personality conflicts with supervisors, company cultures that didn't value innovation, positions that were beneath his skill set. Between jobs, he'd spend weeks on the couch, playing video games, and talking about the business he was going to start once he had the capital. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he'd say when I came home exhausted from another 12-hour day to find him exactly where I'd left him that morning. "It's not easy being a man in this economy. The job market is brutal. I can't just take any random position like you did." Like I did. As if my career was some consolation prize, some random occurrence rather than the result of endless networking, late nights, strategic planning, and relentless effort. As if the promotions I'd earned, the clients I'd landed, the team I'd built meant nothing because I hadn't held out for something better. By the time I turned 30, I was the senior marketing director at my firm, managing a team of 12 people and overseeing campaigns for Fortune 500 clients. I'd tripled my salary since college and was being courted by headhunters from larger companies. Marcus was working at his fourth marketing firm in 3 years, this time as a junior account executive, a position I could have helped him get fresh out of college if he'd been willing to take it then. "It's different for women," he explained when I pointed out the irony. "Companies are dying to promote women these days. All this diversity initiative stuff. You've had advantages I never had." I stared at him across our dinner table. The dinner table I'd bought, in the apartment I'd furnished, eating the groceries I'd purchased. What advantages exactly? You know what I mean. Companies want to look progressive. They fast track women to leadership positions now. I worked 80-hour weeks for 3 years straight to get promoted to senior director. I'm not saying you didn't work hard. I'm just saying you had certain opportunities available to you that weren't available to me. The conversation ended there. It usually did when Marcus started explaining the ways in which my success was actually easier than his struggle. I learned to stop defending myself, stop pointing out the obvious flaws in his logic. It was easier to just let him maintain his narrative, easier to keep the peace. But peace, I was learning, came at a cost, and that cost was myself. The beginning of the end started in September, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Marcus had been at his current job for almost a year, a record for him, and I'd begun to hope that maybe he was finally finding his footing. We'd even started talking about moving in together permanently, maybe getting engaged soon. "There's this new girl at work," he mentioned one evening while I was making dinner. "Amber. She's really young, just out of college. She's got this fresh perspective on things. It's refreshing." I looked up from the pasta I was stirring. "Refreshing how?" "Oh, she's just enthusiastic about everything, optimistic. She sees possibilities where other people see problems." Something cold unfurled in my stomach, but I pushed it down. "That's nice. It's good to have enthusiastic colleagues." "Yeah, she reminds me of how I used to be. Before life beat me down. Before life beat him down. Before the 6 years of financial stress that I had shouldered alone. Before the career disappointments that I had helped him navigate. Before the dreams deferred that I had helped fund." "Maybe you should invite her over for dinner sometime," I said, testing the waters. "I'd love to meet her." "Oh, no, that's not. I mean, she's young. She'd probably be bored by our dinner parties." Our dinner parties. The ones where we invited my colleagues and friends because Marcus rarely maintained friendships for more than a few months. The ones where I cooked and hosted and cleaned up while Marcus entertained everyone with stories about his various career adventures. Over the next few weeks, Amber's name came up more and more frequently. Amber had this insight about their latest campaign. Amber had suggested this innovative approach to client outreach. Amber had such a unique perspective on work-life balance. "She doesn't understand why people get so stressed about their careers," Marcus told me one night. "She says life's too short to spend it worrying about money and promotions and all that corporate ladder stuff. She just wants to enjoy herself and see where life takes her." "That's easy to say when you're 23 and living in your parents' basement," I replied, immediately regretting the sharpness in my voice. Marcus looked at me with something approaching disappointment. "When did you become so cynical, Claire? You used to be more flexible, more open to different ways of thinking." When did I become cynical? Maybe around the time I realized I was the only one in our relationship thinking about our future. Maybe around the time I calculated that I'd spent over $40,000 supporting Marcus's various career transitions. Maybe around the time I started wondering what it would feel like to date someone who actually contributed to our household instead of critiquing my corporate ladder climbing. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I went to bed early and lay awake wondering when I'd become the kind of woman who resented her partner's enthusiasm for a young colleague. Wondering when I'd become the kind of woman who felt threatened by someone else's optimism. The truth was, I wasn't threatened by Amber's optimism. I was envious of it. I remembered being 23 and believing that everything would work out if you just followed your passion and stayed positive. I remembered thinking that financial stress was something that happened to other people who weren't creative enough or determined enough to build the life they wanted. I missed that version of myself, the version who hadn't yet learned that passion doesn't pay rent, that following your dreams requires funding, that staying positive doesn't make up for strategic planning. I missed the woman I'd been before I became the woman who made sure all the bills got paid. In October, Marcus started working late, a lot. "We're pitching this huge client," he explained when I asked why he wouldn't be home for dinner again. "Amber and I are working on the presentation together. She's got some really innovative ideas." Amber and I, not the team or we at the office. Amber and I. I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored. The way he dressed more carefully on days when he had team meetings. The way he checked his phone constantly and smiled at messages he didn't share with me. The way he seemed more energetic and optimistic than he'd been in months. Not because of any change in our relationship, but because of something happening outside of it. "You seem happy lately," I said one evening, watching him hum while he got ready for another late night at the office. "Do I? I guess I am. Work's been really engaging lately. It's nice to feel challenged again, you know? To feel like I'm working with people who appreciate my ideas. People who appreciate his ideas. Not Amber appreciates my ideas, but the more distant people. As if I hadn't spent 6 years appreciating his ideas, encouraging his ambitions, supporting his dreams even when they cost me my own savings. That's wonderful," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I did want Marcus to be happy at work. I wanted him to feel fulfilled and challenged and appreciated. I just wished that happiness didn't feel like it was coming at my expense. In November, the late nights became overnight trips. Client meetings in Milwaukee, team building retreats in Madison, industry conferences in Indianapolis. "It's really boosting my profile at the company," Marcus explained when I pointed out that he'd been traveling more in the past month than in the previous year combined. "They're finally seeing what I can do when I'm given real opportunities." Real opportunities. Unlike the opportunities I'd been giving him for 6 years. Unlike the opportunities that had kept a roof over his head and food on his table while he figured things out. I started imagining what those business trips might look like. Marcus and Amber driving to Milwaukee together, sharing hotel rooms to save on expenses, grabbing drinks after client dinners. I imagined them laughing together in conference rooms, finishing each other's sentences during presentations, developing inside jokes that they couldn't share with anyone back at the office. I imagined Marcus feeling young again, feeling like the promising, ambitious man he'd been in college, instead of the struggling, perpetually disappointed man he'd become in our relationship. I imagined him remembering what it felt like to be with someone who thought he was brilliant and successful and full of potential, instead of someone who knew exactly how many times he'd been fired and how much money he owed in student loans. "Are you having an affair?" I asked him one Tuesday night in late November, after he came home from a client dinner that had lasted until 1 a.m. He looked genuinely shocked. "What? No. Claire, how could you even ask me that? You're working late constantly, you're traveling all the time, and you talk about Amber more than you talk about anything else." "She's my colleague. We're working on important projects together." "I can't believe you jumped to that conclusion." "I'm not jumping anywhere. I'm asking a direct question based on observable behavior." "Observable behavior?" Marcus shook his head. "Listen to yourself. You sound like you're conducting a performance review. This is what I mean when I say you've become so analytical about everything." Analytical. That was apparently my fatal flaw. I was too analytical, too focused on data and patterns and logical conclusions. Unlike Amber, presumably, who was intuitive and spontaneous and refreshingly unconcerned with tedious details like evidence and consistency. "I'm analytical because I care about our relationship," I said. "I'm trying to understand what's happening between us. What's happening is that you've become paranoid and controlling, and it's making me feel suffocated." Controlling. Because asking questions about significant changes in your partner's behavior was controlling. Because expecting basic transparency about work trips and late nights was suffocating. "I'm not trying to control you, I'm trying to connect with you." "Well, you're going about it the wrong way. This interrogation approach isn't working for me." We went to bed angry that night, and the next night, and the night after that. The conversation happened on a Saturday morning in early December. I was sitting at our kitchen table reading the news on my tablet while drinking coffee when Marcus emerged from the bedroom looking uncharacteristically serious. "I think we need to talk, Claire." Something in his tone made my stomach drop, but I kept my voice steady. "Okay, what about—" He sat down across from me, not making eye contact. "I've been thinking a lot lately, and I don't think this is working anymore." There it was. The sentence I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The words that would change everything. Delivered with the same casual tone he might use to announce he was switching breakfast cereal. What isn't working? Us, this relationship. We've grown apart, Claire. We want different things. What different things? Marcus sighed, as if my question was evidence of exactly the problem he was describing. You're so focused on career advancement and financial security and planning for the future. All you care about is work and money and making sure everything is optimized and efficient. I stared at him. I care about those things because someone has to. Because we have rent and utilities and student loans and credit card payments and a dozen other financial obligations that don't disappear just because we ignore them. See, that's exactly what I mean. Everything is about money with you. Everything is about responsibility and obligation and doing the practical thing. And what's wrong with being practical? Nothing, if that's the kind of life you want. But I want something different. I want spontaneity. I want passion. I want to be with someone who believes in taking risks and following dreams, not someone who's constantly worried about budgets and 5-year plans. Someone who believes in taking risks and following dreams. Someone like Amber, who was 23 and had the luxury of being spontaneous because she'd never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. I've been following dreams for 6 years, Marcus. Your dreams. I've been taking risks for 6 years. Financial risks, career risks, emotional risks, all in service of supporting your goals and ambitions. That's different. You made those choices because you wanted to. Nobody forced you to do any of that. You're right. I chose to support you. I chose to believe in your potential, even when you didn't believe in it yourself. I chose to prioritize our future together over my own immediate desires. And now you're telling me that those choices make me boring and unromantic. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I'm not saying you're boring. I'm saying we're not compatible anymore. We've become different people. Who have you become, Marcus? Someone who wants more from life than just this. He gestured around our apartment, the apartment I'd furnished in the neighborhood I'd chosen, with the amenities I'd prioritized. Someone who wants adventure and excitement and the possibility of something bigger. Something bigger than what? Than this routine we've fallen into. Work, dinner, television, sleep, repeat. It's suffocating. I looked around our kitchen, trying to see it through his eyes. The coffee maker I'd bought after researching 12 different models. The dining table I'd saved for 3 months to purchase. The framed photos of our trips together, trips I'd planned and paid for. The life I'd built around us, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. Where will you go? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. I've been staying at Amber's place sometimes. She has a couch in her studio apartment. Just temporarily while I figure things out. Amber's place. The girl who was young and optimistic and refreshingly unconcerned with financial planning. The girl who probably thought Marcus was sophisticated and worldly, who hadn't yet witnessed his pattern of abandoning jobs and commitments when they became challenging. How long have you been staying there, St. Galwis? A few weeks. Nothing happened while we were together, Claire. I would never cheat on you. A few weeks, which meant he'd been living a double life for a few weeks, testing out his new situation while keeping me as a backup plan, which meant every conversation we'd had during those weeks had been a lie by omission. Are you in love with her? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I think I could be. She makes me feel like myself again. Like the person I used to be before I got so weighed down by all this adult responsibility stuff. Adult responsibility stuff. Like paying rent and buying groceries and contributing to a shared life. Like the mundane work of building something sustainable and stable. Like the 1,000 tiny sacrifices that had made his pursuit of passion possible. I see. I stood up from the table, suddenly desperate to be in motion. When do you want to get your things? I can come by next week if that works for you. I don't have that much stuff here anyway. He was right. Most of the furniture was mine, purchased before we moved in together or after with my money. Most of the kitchen supplies, the linens, the decorations, I'd accumulated them over the years while Marcus was between jobs or saving his money for opportunities that never materialized. That's fine, just let me know when... Claire! Marcus stood up too, reaching for my hand. I hope you understand. This isn't about you not being enough. It's about me needing something different at this stage of my life. I pulled my hand away gently but firmly. I understand perfectly. And I did. I understood that Marcus had never seen me as a partner, but as a service provider. I understood that he'd confused my investment in our future with clinginess, my financial stability with lack of adventure, my commitment with suffocation. I understood that he'd been keeping me around until he found someone who could offer him the excitement of new love without the weight of shared history. I understood that he was 30 years old and still believed that passion was more important than partnership, that feeling good was more valuable than doing good, that being happy in the moment mattered more than building something lasting. I understood that I'd spent 6 years supporting a man who saw my support as an entitlement rather than a gift. And I understood with crystalline clarity that I was relieved he was leaving. Marcus moved out the following weekend. He came by on Saturday afternoon with Amber and two of his friends from work, packing his clothes and books and video games into cardboard boxes with an efficiency that suggested he'd been planning this for weeks. I stayed in the bedroom while they worked, ostensibly organizing my closet, but actually just listening to the sounds of my relationship being dismantled. Marcus's laughter as he reminisced with his friends about some shared memory. Amber's voice higher and more animated than I'd expected, asking questions about items she didn't recognize. "Oh, this is cute," I heard her say at one point. "Did you get this in college?" "Yeah, Claire gave it to me for my birthday junior year. She was always getting me little gifts like that." Always getting him little gifts. Concert tickets when his favorite bands came to town. Books by authors he mentioned liking. Electronics he needed but couldn't afford. 1,000 small gestures that had apparently registered as little gifts rather than expressions of love and support. When they finished loading the truck, Marcus knocked on the bedroom door. "We're all done out here. I think I got everything." I opened the door and surveyed the living room. It looked exactly the same, minus a few items I barely noticed were missing. His mark on our shared space had been so minimal that his departure was nearly invisible. "I left my key on the kitchen counter," he said. "Okay." We stood there for a moment, 6 years of shared history reduced to an awkward pause in the doorway. I hope you'll be happy, Claire. I hope you find someone who's a better fit for what you want." What I want. As if my desires were some exotic preference rather than the basic expectations of adult partnership. As if wanting a relationship built on mutual support and shared responsibility was some kind of specialized requirement. "I hope you'll be happy too, Marcus." He nodded and turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth, I think you're going to be fine. You're one of the strongest people I know." Strong. Another way of saying that I didn't need taking care of, that I could handle anything life threw at me, that I was self-sufficient enough not to require the kind of support I'd given him for years. "Thank you," I said, because there was nothing else to say. After they left, I walked through the apartment, cataloging the spaces where Marcus's presence had been. The side of the bed where he'd slept, now covered with throw pillows. The corner of the living room where his desk had been, now open floor space. The shelf in the bathroom where he'd kept his toiletries, now empty except for a single forgotten bottle of cologne. I picked up the cologne and held it for a moment, waiting for the wave of grief that surely should come with the end of a 6-year relationship. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Possibility. For the first time in years, I could make plans without considering someone else's timeline. I could take the promotion opportunity in New York that I'd turned down last year because Marcus didn't want to leave Chicago. I could travel to the places I'd always wanted to see, take the classes I'd been interested in, pursue the friendships I'd neglected while managing Marcus's emotional needs and financial crises. I could date someone who would appreciate my ambition instead of being threatened by it. Someone who would see my financial stability as evidence of competence rather than lack of spontaneity. Someone who would treat partnership as a collaborative effort rather than a support system for their personal growth. I threw the cologne in the trash and opened a bottle of wine. The first month after Marcus left, I threw myself into work with a single-minded intensity that surprised even me. Without the constant drain of managing someone else's emotional and financial needs, I discovered I had reserves of energy I'd forgotten existed. I stayed late to work on the campaign proposals I'd been putting off. I scheduled coffee meetings with contacts I'd been meaning to reconnect with. I attended industry events and networked with a focus and enthusiasm that reminded me of my early 20s, when I'd been hungry and ambitious, and certain that success was just a matter of working hard enough. You seem different lately, my colleague Sarah mentioned during a team meeting in January. More present, I guess. More like yourself. More like myself. I realized she was right. For the first time in years, I felt like Claire the professional, Claire the strategic thinker, Claire the leader, not Claire the girlfriend who was perpetually worried about her boyfriend's latest career crisis. In February, I got a call from a headhunter about a position at a consulting firm in New York. Senior Vice President of Strategic Marketing, managing a team of 25, overseeing campaigns for global clients. The salary was nearly double what I was making in Chicago. I know you turned down the last opportunity we discussed, the headhunter said, but your profile has gotten stronger since then. Several firms have specifically asked if you'd be open to relocation. A year ago, I would have thanked her and explained that I couldn't relocate at the moment. This time, I asked for details about the position and agreed to a phone interview. The interview went better than I'd expected. 3 rounds later, I had an offer. I gave notice at my Chicago firm in March with a start date in New York for early May. My manager tried to counteroffer, but I'd already made up my mind. It was time for something new. Moving to New York felt like shedding a skin I'd outgrown. I found a 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, walking distance from Prospect Park. I bought new furniture, choosing pieces based entirely on my own taste rather than compromise. I joined a gym, signed up for cooking classes, and started reading fiction again for the first time in years. The work was challenging in the best possible way. My team was comprised of smart, ambitious people who shared my intensity and drive. For the first time in my career, I was surrounded by colleagues who expected excellence rather than apologizing for it. "You're a machine," my new assistant David said after my first month, when I'd successfully launched 2 major campaigns and landed 3 new clients. "I mean that in the best possible way. It's inspiring to watch you work." A machine. 6 months ago, Marcus would have meant that as an insult, evidence of my lack of spontaneity and emotional availability. Here, it was a compliment, evidence of my competence and reliability. In June, I was featured in Marketing Weekly as one of 30 under 35 leaders to watch. The article included a photo of me in my office, smiling confidently in the blazer I'd bought specifically for the shoot, and a quote about the importance of strategic thinking in an industry obsessed with viral moments. Claire Dubois represents the future of marketing leadership, the article said. Her approach combines analytical rigor with creative vision, and her track record speaks for itself. In less than 6 months at Meridian Consulting, she's transformed their strategic marketing division and landed several high-profile clients. I posted the article on LinkedIn and watched the congratulations roll in from former colleagues, college friends, and professional contacts. Among them was a comment from Marcus. "Congratulations, Claire. Always knew you were destined for big things." Always knew. As if he'd been my biggest supporter rather than my biggest skeptic. As if he'd encouraged my ambition rather than questioning whether I was too focused on career advancement. As if he'd celebrated my success rather than dismissing it as a product of gender-based advantages in the workplace. I deleted his comment without responding. In July, I met James at a networking event for marketing professionals. He was the creative director at a boutique advertising agency, 10 years older than me, recently divorced, and refreshingly direct about what he was looking for in both his career and personal life. "I'm done with games," he told me over drinks after our 3rd date. "I'm too old to pretend I don't know what I want. I want a partner who challenges me intellectually, who has her own ambitions and goals, who doesn't expect me to be responsible for her happiness." It was revolutionary, dating someone who saw my career success as an asset rather than a threat. James was genuinely interested in my work, asked thoughtful questions about my strategies and campaigns, and celebrated my victories without making them about himself. "You're incredibly driven," he said one evening as we walked through Central Park after dinner. "It's one of the things I find most attractive about you." Driven, not obsessed with money, not focused on the wrong things, not lacking in spontaneity. Driven. "I've worked hard to get where I am," I said. "It shows, and it's paying off. You should be proud of what you've accomplished." "Proud." Such a simple concept, but one that felt foreign after years of having my achievements minimized or explained away. James saw my success as evidence of my character, rather than evidence of my luck or privilege. We'd been dating for 2 months when he suggested I meet his friends. "They're going to love you," he said, as we walked into a rooftop bar in Manhattan where his group was meeting for drinks. "Fair warning, though, they're all pretty successful, so the conversation tends to get competitive. I hope you don't mind." I laughed. "I think I can hold my own." His friends were indeed successful: a documentary filmmaker, a tech entrepreneur, a financial advisor, a medical researcher. The conversation ranged from politics to travel to career strategies, with everyone contributing insights from their respective fields. "Claire just made the 30 under 35 list for Marketing Weekly," James mentioned when the filmmaker asked about my background. "No kidding," said the entrepreneur, a woman named Lisa who'd sold her startup the previous year. "What's your specialty?" "Strategic marketing for consulting firms. I focus on long-term brand positioning and client acquisition strategies." "That's fascinating. I'd love to pick your brain about scaling marketing operations. We're looking at expansion strategies for my new company." The conversation continued for 3 hours, ranging across topics I was genuinely interested in discussing with people who valued expertise and achievement. No one questioned whether I deserved my success or suggested that I'd gotten ahead due to workplace diversity initiatives. No one implied that my focus on career growth made me less feminine or less desirable as a partner. "Your friends are amazing," I told James as we walked to the subway afterward. "They are, and they're definitely impressed with you. Lisa asked for your contact information. I think she wants to hire your firm for a consulting project." Impressed with me. Not charmed by my personality or attracted to my appearance, but impressed with my professional accomplishments. It felt like coming home to a version of myself I'd forgotten existed. By September, my life in New York had taken on a rhythm that felt both exciting and sustainable. I was excelling at work, building meaningful friendships, and dating someone who supported my ambitions while pursuing his own. I'd found an apartment I loved, a routine that energized me, and a sense of myself that felt authentic and powerful. I was also, for the first time in years, genuinely happy. Marcus's name came up occasionally in conversations with mutual friends from Chicago, but I felt surprisingly little curiosity about his life. According to Sarah, he and Amber had moved in together in March, then broken up in June when she decided to move back to her hometown in Ohio to live with her parents while she figured out her next steps. "He seemed pretty devastated," Sarah mentioned during one of our monthly phone calls. "I think he really thought she was the one." The one. The young, optimistic girl who'd represented everything he felt was missing in our relationship. The girl who'd reminded him of who he used to be before life beat him down. I wondered if he'd tried to recreate with her the same dynamic he'd had with me. The older, more established partner supporting the younger, more struggling one. I wondered if Amber had gotten tired of being his emotional and financial support system, or if she'd simply outgrown the relationship the way young people do. I felt a moment of sympathy for Marcus, remembering how devastating it felt to invest in someone who ultimately decided you weren't enough. Then I remembered that he'd done exactly the same thing to me, and the sympathy faded. In October, I was promoted to executive vice president. The promotion came with a significant salary increase, a larger team, and responsibility for the firm's most important clients. I celebrated with James and my New York friends at a restaurant in Soho, laughing and talking until nearly midnight about future plans and current successes. "To Claire," James said, raising his glass. "Who proves that good things happen to people who work for them?" People who work for them. Not people who get lucky. Not people who have unfair advantages. Not people who compromise their authenticity for career advancement. People who work for them. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, exhausted and underappreciated, supporting someone else's dreams while neglecting my own. I thought about the conversation where Marcus had explained that my success was easier than his struggle, that my achievements were less meaningful because of the advantages I'd supposedly had. I realized I'd never adequately thanked him for leaving me. His departure had been the catalyst for everything good that had happened since: the job in New York, the promotion, the relationship with James. The rediscovery of my own ambition and worth. I raised my glass and smiled. The call came in November while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office overlooking Madison Avenue. Claire, it's Marcus. I recognized his voice immediately, though it sounded different somehow, smaller, less confident. Hi, Marcus. How are you? I've been better, honestly. I hope it's okay that I called. I got your number from Sarah. Of course it's okay. What's going on? I'm actually going to be in New York next week for a job interview. I was wondering if maybe we could grab coffee. I'd love to catch up. A job interview in New York, which meant he was looking to leave Chicago, possibly because things hadn't worked out the way he'd planned with Amber or his career. Sure, I'd be happy to catch up. How's Tuesday afternoon? Tuesday's perfect. Should I come to your office? Sarah mentioned you're working at some big consulting firm now. Some big consulting firm, as if my career was still a peripheral detail rather than a central feature of my life. Let's meet somewhere neutral. There's a coffee shop called Blue Bottle near Bryant Park. Do you know the area? I'll find it. Thanks, Claire. I really appreciate this. There was something in his voice I didn't recognize, a note of gratitude that seemed disproportionate to my agreeing to have coffee with him. It made me curious about what exactly had happened in his life since he'd left. I arrived at Blue Bottle 15 minutes early and chose a table near the window, where I could watch for Marcus's arrival. I'd dressed carefully for the meeting, not formally, but in a way that reflected my current life. The navy blazer I'd worn to a client presentation that morning, tailored pants, shoes that were both professional and comfortable. I looked like what I was, a successful executive grabbing coffee during a busy workday. Marcus arrived exactly on time, scanning the cafe until he spotted me. As he walked over, I noticed how different he looked. Older somehow, and less polished than I remembered. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair a little too long, his smile uncertain in a way that was unfamiliar. Claire, wow, you look amazing. Thank you. You look good too. It wasn't entirely true, but it seemed like the kind thing to say. He sat down across from me, glancing around the cafe with the expression of someone trying to calculate how much his drink was going to cost. So, I said, tell me about this job interview. What kind of position? Marketing coordinator at a nonprofit. It's not exactly what I was hoping for at this stage of my career, but, well, things have been tough lately. Marketing coordinator. The same level position he'd held 3 years ago, before his brief stint at the company where he'd met Amber. What happened at your last job? Marcus's expression tightened. Politics mostly. There was a new management structure, and they brought in some outside consultants who didn't understand the culture we'd built. A bunch of us got laid off. Outside consultants. I wondered if he realized he was talking to someone who worked for a consulting firm, someone who specialized in exactly the kind of management restructuring he was describing. I'm sorry, that's always difficult. Yeah, and then with Amber moving back to Ohio, I just felt like maybe it was time for a fresh start somewhere new. Sarah mentioned that you two had broken up. I'm sorry about that too. Marcus shrugged, trying to appear casual. We were in different places in our lives. She was really young, you know. She didn't understand the pressures of building a career, establishing financial stability, all that stuff. All that stuff. The same adult responsibilities he'd criticized me for prioritizing, now reframed as legitimate concerns that Amber hadn't been mature enough to appreciate. How long were you together? About 8 months total. It was intense at first, really passionate. But after we moved in together, Marcus trailed off, shaking his head. She just didn't get it. She thought everything should be easy and fun all the time. She didn't understand why I was stressed about work or why I couldn't just quit my job and travel around Europe with her when her parents offered to pay for the trip. Travel around Europe with her parents' money. I imagined 23-year-old Amber suggesting this plan with genuine enthusiasm, not understanding why her 30-year-old boyfriend couldn't just abandon his responsibilities for an extended vacation funded by someone else. That does sound challenging. She kept saying I was too worried about the future, too focused on money and stability. She said I was turning into one of those corporate drones who forget how to have fun. Corporate drones who forget how to have fun. Almost exactly what he'd said about me before he left for someone who understood the importance of spontaneity and passion. And now you're interviewing for jobs in New York. Yeah, I figured maybe a change of scenery would be good for me. New opportunities, new perspective. Marcus paused, looking at me with something that might have been regret. You seem to be doing really well here. I am. I love the work. I love the city. It's been a good move. Sarah mentioned you got promoted recently? Executive Vice President. I'm managing the strategic marketing division now. That's incredible, Claire, really. I always knew you had the potential for something like that. Always knew, the same phrase he'd used in his LinkedIn comment, the same revisionist history that positioned him as my former champion rather than my former critic. Thank you. We sat in silence for a moment, and I could see Marcus calculating something in his mind, working up to saying whatever he'd really come here to say. Can I ask you something? He finally said. Of course. Do you ever think about, do you ever wonder what might have happened if we'd handled things differently last year? Handled things differently. As if our breakup had been a mutual misunderstanding rather than his decision to leave me for someone younger and more exciting. What do you mean? I've been thinking a lot lately about the mistakes I made, the way I took you for granted, the way I didn't appreciate what we had built together. Marcus leaned forward, his voice becoming more earnest. I think I was going through some kind of quarter-life crisis or something. I got scared about committing to a serious future, scared about settling down. I thought I needed to experience more to make sure I wasn't missing out on something. Quarter-life crisis at age 30. Missing out on something, as if our 6-year relationship had been a limitation rather than a partnership. And did you experience what you were looking for? Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. I experienced a lot of drama and instability and financial stress, if that's what you mean. I experienced what it's like to date someone who has no concept of budgeting or planning or thinking beyond the next weekend. I experienced what it's like to be the responsible one in a relationship for once. The responsible one. I almost smiled at the irony. Marcus had dated someone exactly like himself, someone young and impractical and focused on immediate gratification rather than long-term stability, and discovered that he didn't actually enjoy being in my former position. That must have been an adjustment. It was a nightmare. Do you know she wanted to adopt a puppy when we'd been dating for 3 weeks? A puppy, Claire. When she was working part-time at a smoothie shop and living in a studio apartment with no yard. She couldn't understand why I thought that was irresponsible. I knew exactly how he'd felt. Explaining to someone he cared about why their dreams weren't practical, why their enthusiasm needed to be tempered with reality. I knew exactly how it felt to be cast as the boring, practical partner who didn't understand the importance of following your heart. I see. And when things got tough with my job, when I was stressed about money and the future, she just checked out. She said I was being negative and that she didn't want to be around that energy. Marcus shook his head. She told me I was sucking the joy out of everything. Sucking the joy out of everything. Because worrying about adult responsibilities was joyless. Because financial stress was a choice rather than a circumstance. Because supporting a partner through difficult times was optional rather than foundational. I'm sorry you went through that. The thing is, Claire, it made me realize what I'd lost when I left you. You never made me feel like my problems were too much for you to handle. You never acted like supporting me was a burden or like my stress was bringing you down. Never acted like supporting him was a burden. Because I'd believed that partnership meant sharing both successes and struggles. Because I'd understood that love meant showing up for someone even when they weren't at their best. I believed in us, I said simply. You did. And I threw that away for someone who bailed the moment things got real. Marcus reached across the table as if to take my hand, then seemed to think better of it. I've been thinking about calling you for months. I wasn't sure if you'd want to hear from me. I'm glad you called. It's good to see you. Is it? How do you feel about everything that happened? How did I feel? I felt grateful. I felt vindicated. I felt like the protagonist in a story where the moral was that good things happen to people who value themselves enough to build the life they want. I feel like everything worked out the way it was supposed to, I said. Marcus studied my face, clearly hoping for something more encouraging. Do you think I mean, is there any chance we could try again? I know I hurt you, and I know I have a lot to make up for, but I'm a different person now. I understand what really matters. What really matters? After 8 months with someone who'd reminded him why he'd valued stability and partnership in the first place. Marcus, I said gently, I'm seeing someone. His face fell. Someone serious? Yes, very serious. We're talking about moving in together. Oh. Marcus sat back in his chair, processing this information. Is he. Do you work together? No, he's in advertising, creative director at a boutique agency. That's great. I'm happy for you, Claire. Really? He didn't look happy. He looked like someone who'd just realized that the backup plan he'd been counting on was no longer available. Thank you. Can I ask, what's he like? This guy you're seeing? I thought about James, about the way he celebrated my achievements and supported my ambitions, about the way he saw my drive as an asset rather than a character flaw, about the way we'd built a relationship based on mutual respect and shared goals, rather than one person supporting the other's journey of self-discovery. He's a partner, I said, in the truest sense of the word. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding the implication. He appreciates what he has. We appreciate each other. That's all I'd ever wanted, to find someone who appreciated me the way you did. The way I did, past tense, as if my appreciation had been a temporary condition rather than a conscious choice I'd made every day for 6 years. You'll find that, Marcus, with the right person. I thought I had found it, with you. I looked at him across the table. This man I'd loved and supported and believed in for so long. This man who'd decided I wasn't enough, who'd left me for someone who made him feel young and exciting and free from responsibility. This man who'd now experienced what it was like to be the stable, reliable partner and had come back to me expecting to reclaim what he'd discarded. You did have it, I said quietly. You just didn't want it at the time. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller than before. I know I don't have any right to ask this, but do you forgive me for the way I handled everything? Forgiveness. Such a complex concept when it came to relationships. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger required too much energy, and I'd found better ways to spend mine. But forgiveness implied that what had happened between us was something that needed pardoning, rather than something that had ultimately freed me to build the life I actually wanted. I don't think forgiveness is the right word, I said. I think what happened between us was necessary. For both of us. Necessary? You needed to learn what it felt like to be in my position, and I needed to learn what it felt like to prioritize myself. Marcus considered this. Do you think I learned that lesson? I thought about his description of his relationship with Amber, about his frustration with her inability to understand his stress and support his goals. I thought about his shock at being cast as the practical, responsible partner rather than the exciting, passionate one. I think you learned what it costs to be the person who holds everything together, I said. Whether you learn to value that in a partner, I guess that depends on what you do with the lesson. And what did you learn? I smiled, thinking about the year I'd had since he left. The promotion, the move to New York, the relationship with James, the rediscovery of my own worth and potential. I learned that I'm much stronger than I realized. I learned that I don't need someone to complete me. I need someone to complement me. I learned that the right partner sees your success as something to celebrate, not something to explain away. And so James sees your success that way? James sees my success as evidence of who I am, not as a threat to who he is. Marcus nodded slowly. That's what you deserve, Claire. You always deserved that. Always deserved. But he'd never given it to me. Not until he'd experienced what it felt like to need it himself. We talked for another hour, catching up on mutual friends and sharing stories about our respective lives in Chicago and New York. The conversation was pleasant but surface level, the kind of polite exchange you might have with a former colleague rather than someone you'd shared 6 years of your life with. As we prepared to leave, Marcus hesitated. I know this is probably pointless to say, but I want you to know that leaving you was the biggest mistake I've ever made. I spent 6 years with someone who supported my dreams and believed in my potential, and I threw it away because I thought I deserved something more exciting. Something more exciting, as if excitement and stability were mutually exclusive, as if passion and partnership couldn't coexist. You deserve to be happy, Marcus. We both do. But happiness looks different for different people at different stages of their lives. What does happiness look like for you now? I thought about my morning routine in Brooklyn, about the satisfaction of leading my team through complex client challenges, about the easy companionship I shared with James, about the simple pleasure of making decisions based on my own preferences rather than managing someone else's emotional needs. It looks like building something that lasts, I said, with someone who wants to build it with me. Marcus stood up, gathering his jacket and bag. I hope the job interview goes well tomorrow. Thank you. And Claire, thank you for meeting me today. I know you didn't owe me that. I wanted to see you, I said, and realized it was true. Not because I missed him or wanted to rekindle anything, but because I wanted to see who I'd become in contrast to who I'd been. I wanted to measure the distance I'd traveled. We hugged goodbye outside the coffee shop, a brief, polite embrace that felt like the official end of something that had actually ended months ago. Take care of yourself, Marcus said. You too. I watched him walk toward the subway, then turned and headed back to my office. I had 2 client calls that afternoon and a strategy meeting with my team. I had plans with James that evening, dinner at the new Italian place near his apartment, then a movie we'd both been wanting to see. I had a life that was entirely my own, built on my own terms, shared with someone who saw me as an equal rather than a support system. Marcus had given me that life by leaving me, though he'd never intended to. His departure had been the catalyst for everything good that had followed: the job in New York, the relationship with James, the rediscovery of my own worth and potential. I should probably send him a thank you note. That evening, over dinner with James, I told him about my coffee with Marcus. How was it? James asked, cutting into his osso buco. Weird? Sad? Awkward? Enlightening, I said after considering the question. He wanted to get back together. James raised an eyebrow but didn't look particularly concerned. And I realized how completely over him I am. Not just romantically, but conceptually. I can't imagine being with someone who sees my ambition as a character flaw. Good, because your ambition is one of my favorite things about you. I smiled. Even when I work late 3 nights in a row? Especially then. It means you care about doing excellent work. It means you don't take your success for granted. Don't take success for granted. Such a simple concept, but one that had been foreign to Marcus. He'd expected support without offering it, expected understanding without providing it, expected partnership without participating in it. He said leaving me was the biggest mistake he ever made. Was it? I thought about the question seriously. For him? Probably. He gave up a stable relationship with someone who supported his goals for an unstable relationship with someone who couldn't. For me, it was the best thing that ever happened. Even if it hurt at the time, even if it hurt. Especially because it hurt. The pain forced me to examine what I actually wanted from a relationship instead of just accepting what I was getting. James reached across the table and took my hand. And what did you decide you wanted? Someone who sees me as a partner, not a service provider. Someone who celebrates my wins instead of explaining them away. Someone who wants to build something together instead of expecting me to build something for them. So, you found that? I did. I squeezed his hand. We did. After dinner, we walked through the village, talking about James's latest project and my plans for expanding my team. The conversation flowed easily between personal and professional topics, each of us sharing the details of our lives without feeling like we were competing for attention or support. Can I tell you something? James said as we stopped at a crosswalk. Always. When you told me about Marcus wanting to get back together, I wasn't worried. Not because I'm confident he couldn't win you back, but because I'm confident you know what you want now. What I want. Such a revolutionary concept after years of focusing on what someone else needed. I do know what I want, I said. I want what we have. I want what we're building. Good, James said, leaning down to kiss me as the light changed. Because I want to keep building it with you. 6 months later, James and I moved in together, choosing a 2-bedroom apartment in Park Slope with space for both of our home offices and a kitchen large enough for the elaborate dinner parties we'd started hosting. The apartment was expensive, but we could afford it comfortably on our combined salaries. Two successful professionals sharing expenses, rather than one person carrying the financial load. Our friends were a mix of his colleagues and mine, ambitious people in their 30s who understood the demands of building a career and appreciated the value of a partner who supported rather than competed with their goals. The conversations at our dinner parties ranged from industry trends to travel plans to book recommendations, with everyone contributing insights from their respective expertise. You two have created something really special here, Lisa, the entrepreneur from James's friend group, said after one particularly lively evening. It's so rare to see a couple who genuinely enjoy each other's success. Enjoy each other's success, not tolerate it, not explain it away, not feel threatened by it. Enjoy it. In the spring, I was offered a position as chief marketing officer at a Fortune 500 consulting firm. The role would mean relocating to San Francisco, overseeing marketing operations across multiple divisions, and earning a salary that would put me in the top 5% of professionals my age. That's incredible, James said when I told him about the offer. What an amazing opportunity. It would mean leaving New York, leaving you. James was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. Is it your dream job? It's better than my dream job. It's the kind of position I didn't think I'd be considered for until I was 40. Then you have to take it. I stared at him. Just like that? Just like that. I'm not going to be the person who holds you back from something that could define your career. But what about us? We'll figure it out. Maybe I can find opportunities in San Francisco. Maybe we do long distance for a while. Maybe we get creative about making it work. James took my hand, smiling. Claire, I fell in love with your ambition before I fell in love with you. I'm not going to ask you to choose between me and your career. Not going to ask me to choose. Because he understood that my career wasn't separate from who I was, but central to it. Because he saw my professional growth as something to celebrate rather than something to manage. 2 weeks later, James interviewed with 3 agencies in San Francisco and received offers from 2 of them. Looks like we're moving to California, he said when he called to tell me about the second offer. We. Unless you've changed your mind about wanting a partner who supports your dreams. I hadn't changed my mind. If anything, the experience of having my biggest career opportunity treated as cause for celebration, rather than relationship negotiation, had reinforced everything I'd learned about what I wanted in a partnership. We moved to San Francisco in June, 2 years to the day after Marcus had moved out of our Chicago apartment. The symmetry wasn't lost on me, exactly 2 years from the end of one chapter to the beginning of another. The new job was everything I'd hoped and more. I was managing a team of 45 people across 5 offices, overseeing marketing strategies for clients in technology, healthcare, and financial services. The work was complex and challenging and exactly the kind of strategic thinking I'd always excelled at. You're going to revolutionize how we approach client acquisition, my new CEO said during my first month. Your reputation preceded you, but seeing you in action is even more impressive. Impressive, not threatening, not intimidating, not evidence of misplaced priorities. Impressive. James thrived in San Francisco as well, quickly establishing himself as one of the most innovative creative directors in the city. We bought a house in Noe Valley, hosted dinner parties for our new friends, and traveled to places we'd both always wanted to see. On a Saturday morning in September, while James was making coffee and I was reading industry news on my tablet, my phone buzzed with a Facebook message from someone I didn't immediately recognize. Hi, Claire. You probably don't remember me, but this is Amber Davis. I used to work with Marcus at his marketing firm in Chicago. I hope it's okay that I'm reaching out like this. Amber, the young, optimistic girl who'd represented everything Marcus felt was missing in our relationship. The girl who'd reminded him of who he used to be before life beat him down. I clicked on her profile, curious about what had happened to her since she'd moved back to Ohio. The photos showed a young woman who looked older than her years, posing with a toddler and a man who appeared to be in his 40s. I wanted to reach out because I've been thinking a lot about my time in Chicago and the mistakes I made. I know I was part of something that hurt you, and I wanted to apologize for my role in that. Her role in that. As if she'd been an active participant rather than simply the person Marcus had chosen when he decided I wasn't enough. I kept reading. I was really young and naive when I met Marcus. I thought he was so sophisticated and worldly, and I was flattered that someone with his experience was interested in me. I didn't really understand what kind of relationship he'd left to be with me, what kind of relationship he'd left. A partnership built on mutual support and shared goals. The kind of relationship she was probably hoping to build now with the father of her child. It didn't take long for me to realize that what he really wanted was someone to take care of him the way you had, but without any of the history or expectations that come with a long term relationship. He wanted the support without the responsibility. The support without the responsibility. An elegant summary of Marcus's approach to relationships, seeking the benefits of partnership without offering them in return. When things got difficult with his job and money, he expected me to handle it the way you had, but I couldn't. I was 23 and working part-time and had no idea how to be the kind of partner he needed. I realized he'd left someone who was perfect for him for someone who couldn't give him what he actually wanted. Someone who was perfect for him. Past tense, but still validating to hear from the person who'd replaced me. I hope you're doing well and that you found someone who appreciates what an amazing person you are. I know it's probably too little too late, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry for any pain I caused. Too little too late, but thoughtful nonetheless. I appreciated that she'd taken the time to reach out, and I appreciated her honesty about the dynamics she'd observed. I started to type a response, then stopped. What was there to say? That I forgave her for being young and naive? That I thanked her for confirming what I'd suspected about Marcus's motivations? That I was grateful to her for inadvertently freeing me to build the life I actually wanted? Instead, I closed the message without responding and looked across the kitchen at James, who was reading the newspaper while he waited for the coffee to finish brewing. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing my expression. "Just a message from someone from my past. Nothing important." "Good news, I hope." I thought about Amber's message, about her acknowledgement that Marcus had left someone perfect for him for someone who couldn't give him what he actually wanted. I thought about the life I'd built since then, the career success, the move to San Francisco, the relationship with someone who saw my strength as an asset rather than a threat. "The best news," I said, getting up to join him at the counter. "A confirmation that everything worked out exactly the way it was supposed to." James looked curious but didn't press for details. That was another thing I loved about him. He trusted me to share what I wanted to share when I was ready to share it. I deleted Amber's message and poured myself a cup of coffee. Outside our kitchen window, the San Francisco morning was brilliant and clear, full of possibility and promise. I had a conference call with potential clients at 10, lunch plans with a colleague who was becoming a friend, and dinner reservations with James at the restaurant we'd been wanting to try. I had a life that was entirely my own, shared with someone who celebrated rather than diminished my success. I had work that challenged and fulfilled me, relationships that energized rather than drained me, and a future that excited rather than worried me. Marcus had given me all of this by leaving, though he'd never intended to. His departure had been the catalyst for everything good that had followed, the recognition of my own worth, the prioritization of my own goals, the discovery of what partnership actually looked like when both people showed up as equals. I should probably send him a thank you note, but I had better things to do with my time. 5 years after Marcus moved out of our Chicago apartment, I received an invitation to our college homecoming weekend. The invitation included a directory of alumni updates, and I couldn't resist looking up a few familiar names. Marcus was listed as Marketing Associate at Midwest Community Solutions, Chicago, Illinois. Currently pursuing Evening MBA program. Recently engaged to Jennifer Walsh, elementary school teacher. Marketing Associate? The same level position he'd held when we first started dating, now at a nonprofit organization rather than a for-profit firm. Still pursuing his MBA at 36, still trying to establish the credentials that might open doors to the opportunities he'd always felt he deserved. Recently engaged to an elementary school teacher. Someone stable and nurturing and likely to be understanding about career setbacks and financial stress. Someone who would probably appreciate his ambition and support his goals without expecting too much in return. Someone like I'd been 6 years ago. I hoped Jennifer knew what she was signing up for. I hoped Marcus had learned enough from his previous relationships to show up as an equal partner, rather than seeking another support system. I hoped he'd grown into the man he'd always had the potential to become. Mostly, though, I felt grateful. Grateful that his story was no longer connected to mine, that his choices no longer affected my life, that his happiness or unhappiness was no longer my responsibility. My own update in the directory read Chief Marketing Officer at Pinnacle Consulting Group, San Francisco, California. Married to James Morrison, Creative Director. Recently launched the Morrison Dubois Foundation for Women's Entrepreneurship. Married to James Morrison. We'd gotten married the previous spring in a small ceremony in Napa Valley, surrounded by friends who celebrated our partnership as enthusiastically as we celebrated theirs. The wedding planning had been a collaborative effort, with both of us contributing ideas and making decisions together rather than one person managing the process while the other offered opinions. The Morrison Dubois Foundation was our joint passion project, providing grants and mentorship to women starting their own businesses. We'd funded 12 startups in our first year, all led by women who understood the value of financial planning and strategic thinking. "You've built something remarkable," the foundation's board chair had said at our annual gala, "both professionally and personally. You're proof that success is possible when you refuse to settle for less than you deserve." Refuse to settle for less than you deserve. Such a simple concept, but one that had taken me years to truly understand. I'd thought settling meant accepting imperfection, but I'd learned it actually meant accepting disrespect. I'd thought compromise meant adapting to your partner's needs, but I'd learned it actually meant finding solutions that honored both people's goals. I thought love meant supporting someone unconditionally, but I'd learned it actually meant supporting someone while also expecting to be supported in return. Marcus had taught me all of this by failing to be the partner I needed. His departure had forced me to examine what I actually wanted from a relationship instead of just accepting what I was getting. His choice to leave me for someone younger had ultimately led me to someone better. I closed the alumni directory and looked around my home office, where I was reviewing proposals for the foundation's next round of grants. James was in his office across the hall, working on a campaign for a tech startup led by a woman we'd met at a networking event. We had dinner plans that evening with friends, followed by a concert we'd been looking forward to for weeks. I had a life filled with purpose and partnership and mutual respect. I had work that mattered, and relationships that energized me, and a future that excited me every day. Marcus had made all of this possible by leaving me for someone younger. He'd thought he was choosing excitement over stability, passion over partnership. What he'd actually done was free me to discover what real partnership looked like. I should probably send him a thank you note. But I had a foundation to run, a husband to love, and a future to build. I had better things to do with my time.